I have a lot of respect for Vermanubis. I think he's a very intelligent guy. I really enjoy his Twitter. I talked with him on numerous occasions as well, mostly about non-Smash related stuff though, because we both are big fans of Motoi Sakuraba, who's a composer of video game music, and he's very into music. So this is the first time I'm actually watching a Vermanubis video. So let's see if he lives up to the praise or not. But I think, talking about the title, one of my opinions is that if you ever plateau, the best thing to break that plateau is to gain a new perspective. So yeah, let's take a look. Let's see if the audio is fine first.
There's one question you'll never
should be fine, right?
And that's, how do I get to the next level? What skill am I missing?
His tag is daddy.
Ceiling. And yeah, some of us get trapped under a ceiling and feel like we stagnated for ages without ever going anywhere, sometimes even getting passed by people who've played or practiced way less than us along the way, and nothing's going to discourage you quite like having nothing to show for your efforts.
Yep.
That said, not only...
So, talking about having something to show for your efforts, right? I think it's kind of... it goes two ways, because on one hand, yes, you want to see results from the work you put in. On the other hand, if you keep working and you know you're working smart and hard, you're eventually, the results will follow. So on one hand, yes, results are going to keep you motivated. On the other hand, results should not be the end goal, right? So I think that's a very hard balance to strike, because a lot of people kind of fall into the trap of focusing on one or the other. A lot of people fall into the trap of preferring one or the other. So people who play only for improvement, and then they give up because there are no results. And then there's people who only play for results, and then on the short term they get excellent results, but then long term they fall off. So yeah, it's a mix of both. You have to focus on the short term enough to keep trucking, but then your primary focus should be on the long term. I think that's a nuance that's pretty important to highlight.
Is this the most common question people ask themselves? It's also probably the question I've personally been asked the most. Most of us look at getting good as climbing a mountain. That there are these definite milestones by which we can mark that progress in the same way you get belts in karate or jiu-jitsu. But I don't think that's the right way to view things. In fact, I think that's a completely inaccurate representation of meaningful progress.
Okay.
It wrongly implies both that we suck because we've plateaued, and that some of us just don't have what it takes.
Well, I don't think it. Okay, so I don't think improving is climbing a mountain, because a lot of times when you're improving, you're actually improvement is like a sine wave, right? So if we draw that out, it's improvement looks like this. And then ideally every wave you get a little bit higher, right? So you're a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher. But if you're at this point, you're going to be worse than both of these, right? But it's very important to know how improvement looks to not get discouraged. So this is kind of what we're talking about a second ago as well, talking about results on the short term and focusing on the long term. So if you're looking at short term results, you're trying to improve like this, which works, but the issue is, at the core, what you want to do is you want to go for circular improvement. So something, you're at this point, right, and you go around the circle, and as you go around the circle, you learn something new, and 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 you learn something new. And then when you're back at the beginning, because of all these new things you've learned, you have gained new perspectives, and then when you get back to this point, you're looking at this thing that you learned in an entirely different way. And that is going to force you to relearn this, and that's going to force you to rethink your fundamental basis. So that is what this is. So this is you unlearning the wrong things, and then you relearn the good things, and you end up better. And then as you go through that journey, you once again gain new perspectives, and then you go through the same process again. So it's unlearning learning. It's reconsidering whether your basis is strong enough. And if you do this, so if you're one of these climbers, then you're basically just trying to learn new stuff constantly. And if, say that somewhere around here, you've learned something fundamentally that's wrong, by the time you're here, it's going to take that much more effort to rebuild that foundation. So improvement is circular, and that's why improvement is a sine wave. Because, if you unpack a circle, it's a sine wave. So that's basically what it is it makes sense, right? So the circular improvement, you go around, you learn new things, you reconsider old things. And then what you get is a bobble. But yeah. So yeah, like seriously said, it's not intuitive, because it feels like, if I'm getting better, why should I be getting worse? But you do. It's a little bit hard to say though, because at the end of the day, everyone has their own journey. But I definitely feel like ideally you as you learn new things, you understand more about the game, which is going to make you learn your old things in different ways or rework them. Yeah, so I've had tournaments even in Smash 4 when I was one of the best in Europe, where I performed massively under my expectations. But it's because I try to keep implementing new things. And so there's two parts to it, right? So one of it is unlearning and then learning something better. So that's one thing. Another thing is, as you are working to implement something new, so let's draw the pattern again, even if it's ugly. So as you learn to implement something new, which happens here, your cohesiveness of your gameplay starts to be less cohesive. Your gameplay starts to be less cohesive. And as your game gets less cohesive, your skill level drops. So then you're at a low. And then as you get more used to how this new thing that you're trying to implement works and how it interacts with your other tools, you start building up to a new game plan that has this new tool built in, so it's stronger than before. And it interacts with all of the other aspects properly. And then when it's fully implemented, only then should you implement a new thing. Once again, your game kind of becomes less coherent. You get at a low point, and then you start building it back up as you start understanding it better and better. It's all a matter of understanding and, as he says, perspectives.
Smash is less like climbing a mountain and more like rotating one of those.
How do you play plateauing? So plateauing is when when you do this, eventually you cannot climb anymore, because your next step, if we look back at the circle, so you've completed the circle and you haven't gained new experience, new perspectives. You haven't really thought about what you wanted to do. You just looked at the next thing to implement. So then you have to work on this thing that was actually wrong, but you don't know that's actually wrong. You didn't spend time thinking about this option with the new knowledge that you have. So I think at its core, plateauing is having no new theoretical knowledge to implement. So at the end of the day, all practice is applied theory. And I know a lot of people don't really bother with theory, which is fine, because subconsciously you always do. Like, you learn new things from playing the game, right? So at its core, plateauing is having no new theoretical things to implement into your gameplay. And in practice, it could look something like this, where you completed the circle and you haven't gained new perspectives, which happens even if you do everything correctly, because a new perspective is not something that happens automatically. It's in a lot of ways a very special thing. But I think at its core, it is something you usually get as you go down the circle. But I remember, like, when I was, once again, going back to, like, Smash 4, when I was at that level, I didn't know, I plateaued, like, I think, like, 3 times myself. And every time I continued growing, so I got a new perspective on one thing, which gave me a new perspective on the other thing. And then I started going down the circle again. So that gave me a new perspective. But I couldn't get it on my own. It didn't click for me. And I think the best way to get new perspectives, if this is not working, or if this starts getting still, is to talk with people about the game, watch VODs of top-level players of your character, or get destroyed by someone who knows the matchup very well. So for me, the third thing happened all 3 times when I plateaued. So the first time I went to Fire Emblem Saga in the US, and I got absolutely destroyed by Wadi. And Wadi practices versus Korin like twice a week. His region was full of Korins. He murdered me. And then I played with Daph afterwards, who's a Robin main, very good player. And he did very similar things as Wadi, but he didn't beat me as hard. And that kind of let me realize, like, the things that are happening are the same, but now I have more time to analyze what exactly went wrong, right? And that gave me that new perspective. And then the second time happened when I went to the US again. And the third time, I don't even remember. I think the third time was kind of when I quit. I was already kind of stagnating back then. So yeah, it is a bit of a snowball, but it's a snowball that can abruptly stop. Imagine going months without new high-level footage of your main. So that's one thing. I don't think there's any choke footage out there that can help me a lot at this point either. So what I do is I talk to True4. So when I have an idea, I talk to True4, and he's like, oh, that sucks, so that's good, and then we can talk about why. And that helps a lot. I also talk with other players about the game, like Space, like Meru, like S1, and I think those conversations are actually the best ways to gain new perspectives. What's that great section of ice setting happening? Yeah, I needed this. I felt like I plateaued. Then you're in the right place. Let's continue watching the video before we lose track.
Getting good at Smash is less like climbing a mountain and more like rotating one of those pieces of visual art that changes with perspective, like this video here. There are better and worse ways to look at the sculpture for everything to come together, and you just have to keep changing your perspective until it comes into.
That's cool.
The exact same is true of Smash. The whole journey isn't about climbing up well-defined rungs of the ladder, but constantly adjusting your perspective and way of thinking to see new
Okay, so I agree. I agree that the key of getting better is changing your perspective. Because at the end of the day, so he looks at it from a different way, right? So what I just explained to you was the journey of the player. So, jeez, why is it not? There you go. So the journey of the player is this, right? This cycle of peaks, highs and lows, right? Highs and lows, highs and lows, highs and lows. What he's looking at is he's looking at it from a game perspective. So what he's saying is the game will always stay what it is. The only thing that can change is the way that you look at it, which is also very true. Just a different way to look at it. I think that's pretty interesting, actually. I never approached it that way, but I think that's a very valid way to look at the game.
Problems that previous ways of thinking didn't account for. Okay, assuming you're a little confused by now, let me hit you with a concrete example. Over the past few centuries, models of physics have evolved, and up until the early 20th century, Newtonian mechanics were the prevailing model of how the physical world worked.
Are we talking about quantum physics?
And the model was basically a layup, until people started to take a real hard look at light, and suddenly Newtonian mechanics failed spectacularly.
Yeah.
But why?
Light is both a particle and a wave.
Newtonian mechanics didn't account for quantum level phenomena.
Yeah, there you go. Alright, we're talking about quantum physics.
Scientists
Cool.
encountered a previously unaccounted for problem, and to be consistent,
That imagery is really cool, yeah.
adjusted their perspective to create that much more successful of a model. Similarly in Smash, there is some detail in our way of thinking that we're failing to account for that leads to imperfections and inconsistencies, and while we're tempted to think there's just one thing or habit that explains our problems that someone can just pluck out while observing us, it's less about individual problems and more about your entire way of understanding the game being based on sometimes successful but ultimately unsuccessful ways of thinking to solve problems.
Oh my god. So, oh my god, guys. He's saying exactly what I've been saying. Like, I coach people and I try to talk about perspectives and I talk about concepts. So that's exactly what it is. It's like, when I coach someone, it's often because, and I talk about this in my video. So I have a video, why coaching is the shortcut to mastery, which is basically the same thing as he's saying, right? By the way, 500 subscribers hype. It's basically the same thing as what he is saying. Is you're losing because there's something about the way you look at the game. There's something about the way you look at the game that's not that's you're missing a variable. And when I coach people, I try to figure out what variables are they missing, and I give it to them. I'm like, okay, you're missing these I call them concepts or perspectives, but they're the same thing.
But ultimately unsuccessful ways of thinking to solve problems.
Yeah.
Just think of like Jenga. You got one bad block down towards the bottom, which means you're only going to be able to build so high.
Dude, we just talked about this when we talked about the stairs. The one block of Jenga. The foundation, that's not correct. That's preventing you from growing. So, yeah, kicking off if you wanted your answer. There it is.
This, I think, for example, explains the difference between, say, top 5 PGR versus top 50. Going back to the perspective analogy, the angle we're looking at this picture here is good enough to let us know we're looking at what's supposed to be a face, but it's not a great angle. The average high-level player could be said to be looking at this picture from the angle being shown, while players like Leo, Samsora, or Tweak or whatever are looking at it squarely from the front. Their mental models of the game account for not so obvious fine-grained details that give them finer control of the match.
Yeah, so I think this is the core of a lot of decision making, and I think, see, the one thing, so there's one caveat, is that at the end of the day, applying a perspective is different than having it. So, talking about coaches, right? So, or Vermanubis himself, right? So Vermanubis knows all this stuff, but applying it is a whole different story. So while, yes, I agree that oftentimes top-level players have a better perspective than high-level players, there can also be just some factor that's preventing someone from accurately implementing this perspective. And I think, so talking for myself, right? So I would call myself like a high-level player in Smash Ultimate, but I still have issues applying this perspective that I have. Because I don't have enough knowledge about the game, I still have some issues with Shulk's execution. There's a lot of matchups I don't know. There's a lot of scenarios that I cannot recognize quickly enough. Stuff like that. So while yes, a good perspective is definitely like it's basically the best thing you can do is try to get a view, like a mental model, as he says, of the game that's as accurate as possible, but that's not all. There's more to it. There's more to it for sure.
So getting good is really all about evolving perspectives rather than climbing a mountain.
Yeah, so once again, evolving perspectives is the core of getting good because, like I mentioned, you plateau when you don't have new theoretical knowledge to apply. But it's not everything. It's not all of it. There's more to the story.
Progression in Smash isn't a total linear ordering like a number line where every point on the line is either plainly greater or less than another point. It's more like a partial order. Unlike a total order where everything forms a nice well-defined line, not everything in a partial order is comparable to everything else. For some intuition on the difference, consider the number line again. For every point on the number line, call any 2 points x and y, x is either greater, less than, or equal to y. We know where everything stands with respect to everything else. Just like the number line we're all familiar with. Pick any two numbers and you'll always know which is greater, lesser, or equal.
Yes.
This is a total order and how we usually view progress in relative skill levels. Now consider a pyramid and all the blocks that make it up. The top 3 blocks are higher up than the bottom 300 blocks, so we can say that there are maximal and minimal blocks compared to generally better or worse playstyles, more successful players, but we can't say there are greatest or least blocks if we determine ordering by vertical height. Why? Maximum implies that nothing is greater, but does not imply that everything else is lesser. Similar to...
So I think this is a little bit hard to say, because if we, like, I think there are skills that are like you said, like there's an increasing pattern in it, so you get better and better at it. But there's also things that just kind of are off and off switches, right? So for myself, I think one of the things is I have issues accurately estimating my opponent's skill level. So sometimes, so what I used to do is I would just assume that my opponent is the best they can be, and go from there because I didn't want to underestimate my opponent. But now, recently, I've been trying to capitalize on my opponent's skill level more, and that has helped me improve in-game so much. So I didn't get better and better at the skill. It's just a different perspective that I could immediately apply. So yes, well, to some degree, I get what he's getting at. Of course, I do. But it kind of falls flat, but then again, I've made enough comparisons that fall flat myself.
To that, greatest implies both that nothing is greater and everything is lesser. If there are 3 top blocks, then those 3 are equal, so nothing is greater, but they are not greater than each other, so they're not greater than everything. What that all means is that progress isn't the linear mountain climb we envision it as, but once again, exploring new perspectives which lead to understanding new problems, which ends in a better understanding of the game and consistent high-level performance. What makes players like Leo the way they are is, then, not any one thing they do or innumerable set of milestones they've achieved, but the vantage point they view the game from, such that they recognize and account for problems many of our ways of thinking aren't even aware of are a thing.
It's crazy. Like, if you ever watch Leo, or if you watch my analysis of Leo, like, the way he plays is, like, so optimal, but then whenever I watch him play, I'm like, I don't think I would be able to do that. Even though I know exactly what he's doing, I was like, would I be able to make those decisions in those moments? It feels like, so one of the things that I think is kind of underrated here is that, yes, it is vantage point, but I think it's like a lot of what Leo does is based on knowledge. So he knows exactly what the threats are, how to counterplay them, and that's not, or well, I should say experience. And that's not a vantage point. That's a lot of grinding the game. Like, I think I would not be surprised if Leo played the game the most out of every like top level Smash player, and you know, it shows in how well he plays situations. His instinct is so polished and it's so close to theory. To me, that just shows that he thought a lot about what he wants to do, and he's actually spent a lot of time implementing it well. And I think at this point, it's implemented so well into his game, like into his brain, that is how he plays Byleth so well, right? So if we compare his Joker to his Byleth does the same things his Joker does. It's just with a slightly different toolkit. A very different toolkit. But he looks for the move that fulfills the purpose. Like, doesn't look at individual moves, he looks at like the purposes. And that is why, like, I could see MKLeo pick up any character and do well with them, because his general game plan is so solid, and he just needs the few tools that serve the purposes to kind of fill in the offensive things he wants to do. Because a lot of the basis of his plan is system mechanics and defensive things like dash back, jump back, full hop, hold shield for a long time, spot dodging and rolling at the right moment, stuff like that, right? Which any character can do. But then he kind of accentuates it with the few strong options that a character has. So if a character has a dominant option, he tries to focus on that. So for Byleth, it would be neutral air, a lot of neutral air, etc.
It's not about just adding knowledge, but finding what kinds of knowledge are useful, and that's not easy.
Nope.
You can be a very capable player, but just have an imperfect, even if sometimes successful, mental model of the game. Take a look at this picture, for instance. This is a multivariable function.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
2 really pronounced peaks, but they're both pretty far from each other. In the same way the shorter peak is pretty good, but pretty far from the highest peak, so too can a very capable player plateau at a pretty good spot, but hit a dead end without seriously readjusting the perspective on the game.
Yep.
So
that's a very good image.
Now is, how do you find the magic angle that brings everything into focus and makes everything make sense? The perfect mental model. There's unfortunately...
No, there is a way. It's watching my coaching. Dude, subscribing to Ramses Esports on YouTube, on Twitch, joining the Discord, joining the conversation, getting that knowledge, expanding the brain. It's right here, Verb. It's right here, dude. I need to message this guy. Send him over, bro. I'll coach you.
No good answer I've yet found to that. Smash Conceptions is, in a way, my own personal chronicle of the evolution of my own perspective on the game and my attempt to model the game in a way that's competitively successful and to frame information in ways I personally find useful. But ultimately, the journey of getting good in Smash is about changing your perspective until the big picture comes into view by both discovering new kinds of knowledge and determining how to frame that knowledge in a way that accounts for the greatest amount of problems and gives you the best conceptual control of the match.
Yep.
Anyway, I think I will stop there at the risk of needlessly confusing you.
This is a really good video. I'm going to subscribe to Verm. I think, okay guys, if you're please subscribe to Verm. Here's his YouTube. His videos, like if all his videos are of this level of quality, and he has a lot of them, please watch them. I'm considering messaging him and seeing if we can like create something together, because I think this is very high level. This is basically the best theory I've heard outside of my own. That is crazy. He has been uploading at a decent interval actually, Aki, but yeah, 1 month ago, 2 months ago. So yeah, interesting, extremely good video. A little bit lacking in nuance here and there, but then again, it's 7 minutes, so I could add my own. But yeah, very interesting, very interesting. Let's see if we can get going with viewer battles now.